what have you made of whatever is little has come to the public eye thus far? What do you expect the next 2 months to throw up in terms of reforms, measures, moves?
Well, these problems, I should emphasize, are not unique to India. It's a challenge for many countries, including in the advanced economies, to get their financial sector in the right shape to fund the growth that is needed in all countries. Particularly, it's challenging to engage with the private sector and in smaller scale private sector projects. I think if we look at a sector here in India that is ripe for further activity, it's the real estate sector, both in terms of funding construction and then obviously mortgage financing for creditworthy clients. But we've noticed in terms of the weakness in the economy, things like two-wheeler vehicle sales that have been impacted by the problems in the shadow banking sector. And that shadow banking sector got so big partly because the public sector banks were not in a position to lend. I think the public sector banks, there's a quite obvious macro solution to this, which is to use some of the reserves that India has built up to recapitalize, but also to merge and to change management, to make really clear what is and is not a kind of like, say, a public good aspect of their lending and where they are or are not going to compete with the private banks. Because in aggregate, there has been this persistent problem of growth disappointment. And I think that there's, again, India's not unique in that. There are other countries in the emerging world. Brazil, which we also like for different reasons, has had a quite weak growth environment. In Brazil's case, they're trying to address their key issue, which is the overly large size of the public sector and their public pensions obligations. And again, that they need to get their private capex story going again. But we also need to see that happening here in India. So I'm not the person to give sort of detailed comments on this, but we want to see with a new administration here, a new finance ministry team, we want to see more action on this front.
You would expect, or you would hope for this action to be front-ended immediately around the budget or immediately post the budget, or is it okay for this to happen 3-6 months down the line? Because the reason I'm asking, because a lot of people are basing their targets or their predictions on the markets based on what happens in the budget. Too many hopes from the budget, and not all of them may turn out to be true, because the last 5 years this government has shown that they don't necessarily apply to the demands and the wishes of the Lal Street.
Well, I think it's always the case that the government sets the overall environment, but it's the private sector, both consumers and corporates, that can really drive development in any country. And here, obviously, the oil price moving lower and the reduced fiscal subsidy regime, that should pass through relatively quickly. Remember also the trade and tariff issues offer significant potential benefits for India in terms of supply chain relocation, which we're already seeing in sectors like mobile phone handset assembly, textiles. There'll be others where you'll get that relocation. So the budget isn't the only part of it, but what we're interested in seeing in the budget is, yes, there'll be more infrastructure spending, and we'd give the government a good score for that, and hopefully more measures to attract foreign FDI and FII. But this key issue about getting the banking system fixed to fund growth, it hasn't been prosecuted aggressively enough, and it needs to be at the start of this new administration.
So you would want this to be a part of the budget in some form or the other?
Yes,
okay.
We want to see some really concrete initiatives and action on this.